You know how history loves a winner, but completely forgets about the guy who finished second? Today's story is about a man who flew across the Atlantic just 2 weeks after Charles Lindbergh, flew farther than Lindbergh, and did it while babysitting what may be aviation's first accidental hitchhiker. This is the story of Clarence Duncan Chamberlin, the coolest aviator you've probably never heard of. I'm Bill, and this is Buffalo Air Park. Let's dive in. Alright, let's set the scene. Clarence Duncan Chamberlin was born in 1893 in Denison, Iowa. His father, known around town as EC, was a jeweler and a mechanical tinkerer. He also owned the very first automobile in town, a loud, rattling contraption so notorious that people complained about it before road noise was a thing. Young Clarence grew up fixing watches in his father's shop, learning how tiny gears work together under pressure. And it turns out that skill, keeping delicate machinery alive, comes in handy when you're thousands of feet in the air and your engine is actively trying to kill you. Clarence went off to study engineering at Iowa State, but he didn't exactly do things the normal way. To pay his way through school, he worked nights at a railroad power station, and instead of renting a room, he literally lived on the trains, sleeping, studying, and commuting back and forth like some kind of mechanical hobo scholar. Eventually, he dropped out and did something far more sensible. He ran a Harley-Davidson dealership. He was doing well, until aviation ruined everything. A visit to the World's Fair and one glimpse of an airplane was enough. Clarence wanted to fly, and when World War I broke out, he marched into a recruiting office and asked to be a pilot. The Army recruiter looked at him and said, "Aviation's full. How about balloons?" Clarence politely declined floating helplessly through enemy fire and eventually forced his way into flight training. But, in a twist of comic bad timing, the war ended the exact day he arrived in Hoboken, New Jersey, ready to ship out. So Clarence went home and tried to be normal. He ran the jewelry store again, sold phonographs, but one afternoon he heard an airplane overhead. He ran outside, stared up at the sky, and quit on the spot. He emptied his savings, bought a Belenka airplane, and became a barnstormer. His pricing was refreshingly honest. $15 for a nice calm ride, $25 for the works. And by the works, I assume he meant screaming, inverted, and questioning your life choices. Yeah, I'm in. By 1927, the aviation world had gone completely mad over the Orte Prize, $25,000 for the first non-stop flight from New York to Paris. Clarence found himself flying for a millionaire salvage dealer named Charles Lindbergh, a man so difficult that even historical accounts struggle to describe him politely. Irascible and pompous are the friendly versions. Here's where history gets fun. Charles Lindbergh, yes, that Lindbergh, actually tried to buy Clarence's airplane, the Columbia, to fly to Paris himself, but Lindbergh was such a nightmare during negotiations that Lindbergh walked away, went west, and built the Spirit of St. Louis instead. So, while Lindbergh is calmly preparing for immortality, Clarence is stuck managing lawyers and egos. To prove the Columbia could make it, Clarence and pilot Bert Acosta set an endurance record, 51 hours in the air, circling Long Island, flying over 4,100 miles without actually going anywhere. Clarence later said they won a record, but not the right to fly to Paris. Why? Because Lindbergh fired the navigator, Lloyd Berthoud. Berthoud sued, and the court grounded the airplane. Clarence Chamberlin was literally grounded by paperwork while Lindbergh landed in Paris. But Clarence wasn't done. 2 weeks later, the legal mess clears. The new plan? Fly past Paris all the way to Berlin, beat Lindbergh's distance outright. On June 4th, 1927, the Miss Columbia sits on the runway. The engine's running. Clarence is strapped in. Charles Lindbergh is standing nearby, in a business suit. Suddenly, Lindbergh pushes past officials, ignores his screaming wife, who is yelling, "Stop him, stop him," and jumps into the cockpit. Clarence looks at him, looks at the runway, and takes off. Just like that, Charles Lindbergh becomes the world's first transatlantic passenger by essentially hijacking his own airplane. The flight itself was eventful. At one point, Lindbergh, who is not a pilot, took the controls, climbed to 20,000 feet, got confused, and put the airplane into a spin. They fell from the sky down to 4,000 feet before Clarence recovered. Somewhere during that descent, Clarence probably reconsidered every decision he'd ever made. They crossed paths with ships in the Atlantic, even flying over the Navy cruiser Memphis, which was carrying Lindbergh back to America. The first and second transatlantic pilots waved at each other in the middle of the ocean, history literally crossing paths. Eventually, they ran out of fuel over Germany and landed in a wheat field near Eisleben. A local farmer helped refuel the plane, using gasoline poured from a quart-sized coffee pot. Because of course they did. They finally reached Berlin to a crowd of 100,000 cheering spectators. Clarence had flown 3,911 miles, about 300 miles farther than Lindbergh. From Berlin, Clarence made a phone call to his mother in Omaha, believed to be the longest distance phone call ever completed at the time. Levine wanted to fly the airplane back to America. Clarence, displaying rare wisdom, said absolutely not and booked passage home by ship. Levine tried flying it himself, got lost, and landed in England. On the trip home, Clarence decided boats were too slow, so he took off from the deck of the ship Leviathan to deliver mail faster, while reporters leaned over the railings, seasick and horrified. During the Great Depression, Clarence ran a flying circus using massive Curtiss Condor biplanes. When people couldn't afford $3 rides, he offered 10-cent taxi rides down the runway. Once the plane was full, he'd turn around and say, "All right, who wants to actually fly for $1?" It worked every time. He later set altitude records in diesel-powered airplanes, proving the engines weren't junk, and even planned high-altitude flights to Europe before World War II shut down that dream. During the war, he pivoted again, opening trade schools that trained thousands of mechanics for the war effort. Clarence Chamberlin died in 1976. He fixed watches, lived on trains, outsmarted lawsuits, beat distance records, and crossed the Atlantic with an uninvited passenger in a business suit. Lindbergh got fame. Clarence got the better stories. And that wraps up another tale from aviation's stranger side. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies.